I was lying in my bed pretending to sleep when I heard my daughter Christina's voice coming from downstairs in the kitchen talking to her husband Derek, and the sound of their conversation made my blood run cold, because Christina said Mom won't last another month the way she's deteriorating, and then everything will be ours, and Derek laughed and replied, finally $8 million, and that house in Malibu. I can already taste the freedom, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces because this was my only daughter, the girl I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd raised alone after her father abandoned us when she was 3, the woman I'd put through Harvard Business School by working 16-hour days at my restaurant, and she was standing in my kitchen at midnight plotting my death, like I was nothing more than an obstacle between her and a bank account. My name is Susan Kim, and I'm 66 years old, and I've spent the last 43 years building my fortune from absolutely nothing, because when I came to Los Angeles from South Korea in 1981, I had exactly $73 in my purse and couldn't speak a word of English. But I had something more valuable than money. I had determination that burned like fire in my chest, and I worked as a dishwasher, then a line cook, then a sous chef, until I saved enough to open my own tiny restaurant in Koreatown. And that one restaurant became 2, then 4, then 8, and now I own a chain of 12 successful Korean fusion restaurants across California, plus commercial real estate and investments that are worth $8.2 million, and every single penny of that fortune was earned through sweat and sacrifice and sleepless nights and burns from hot oil and cuts from sharp knives and customers who yelled at me because my English wasn't perfect, and landlords who tried to cheat me because I was a foreign woman, and banks that refused to give me loans because they said I was too risky. And through all of that I never gave up because I had Christina, and I thought I was building this empire for her, so she would never have to struggle the way I did, and now my own daughter was waiting for me to die so she could spend it. I lay there in the darkness with my heart pounding and my mind racing because I needed to understand exactly what was happening, so I stayed completely still and kept listening, and Christina said to Derek, I've been putting the pills in her evening tea for 6 weeks now, and the doctor said her kidney function is declining rapidly, and Derek asked what kind of pills, and Christina replied the ones I ordered online from that pharmacy in Mexico, the ones that slowly cause organ failure, but look like natural aging, and Dr. Harrison assured me that at her age nobody would suspect anything, and my entire body went cold, because my daughter wasn't just waiting for me to die, she was actively poisoning me, and suddenly everything made sense, because for the past 2 months I'd been feeling increasingly weak and nauseous and dizzy, and my legs would give out randomly, and I'd had terrible stomach pains, and my doctor, Dr. Patricia Wong, kept running tests and saying my kidneys were showing signs of failure. And my liver enzymes were elevated and suggesting it was just age-related decline, but it wasn't age, it was murder. It was my own daughter slowly killing me with poison, and I realized in that moment that I had to do something drastic, something so shocking that it would expose her true nature to everyone, and that's when the idea came to me like lightning striking my brain. I would fake my own death and attend my own funeral to hear what people really thought about me, and more importantly to catch Christina red-handed. The next morning I woke up and acted even weaker than usual, shuffling slowly to the kitchen where Christina was making coffee and wearing her fake concerned daughter face, and I said in a faint trembling voice, "Sweetheart, I feel terrible today, worse than ever, I can barely stand," and she turned to me with this look of concern that I now knew was completely fake, and said, "Oh Mom, maybe you should stay in bed today, let me bring you some tea and toast," and I nodded weakly and said yes, that would be nice. And I watched her prepare the tea, and I saw her reach into her purse when she thought I wasn't looking and pull out a small brown bottle and add something to my cup, and she brought it to me with a gentle smile, and said, "Here Mom, drink this, it'll make you feel better." And I took it with shaking hands and said, "Thank you, darling, you're so good to me," and she kissed my forehead and said, "I love you, Mom," and those words tasted like poison because I knew she was lying, and as soon as she left the room I poured the tea into a small flask I'd hidden in my nightstand drawer because I was going to need evidence. I waited until Christina left for her yoga class, and then I called my lawyer Robert Martinez, who had handled all my business affairs for 20 years, and I said, "Robert, the first need you to come to my house immediately and bring a notary and recording equipment, and don't tell anyone where you're going, because I'm about to do something that will sound absolutely insane, but you have to trust me." And Robert knew me well enough to hear the urgency in my voice, so he arrived within an hour with his assistant. And I explained everything the conversation. I'd overheard the poisoning the murder plot. And I showed him the flask with the poisoned tea, and I told him my plan to fake my death and attend my own funeral, and he stared at me like I'd lost my mind and said, "Susan, this is dangerous and possibly illegal and definitely crazy." And I replied, "Robert, my daughter is poisoning me right now. That's definitely illegal. So are you going to help me or not?" And he sighed deeply and ran his hand through his gray hair and said, "Okay, I'm in. What do you need?" And I said, "First, I need you to take this tea to a private laboratory and have it tested for toxins, and I need you to document everything with photographs and statements, and then I need you to help me plan a funeral." Over the next 3 days, Robert worked quickly and quietly because time was critical since Christina thought I was dying, and the lab results came back showing dangerous levels of antifreeze, ethylene glycol, and arsenic in the tea, which explained my kidney failure and liver damage and nausea, and the toxicologist said that if I'd been drinking this for 6 weeks, as Christina claimed, I was lucky to be alive, and Robert photographed everything and documented everything, and then I contacted Dr. Patricia Wong, my physician of 30 years, and I asked her to come to my house for a private conversation, and when she arrived I showed her everything: the poison tea, the lab results, the recording equipment Robert had hidden throughout my house, and I explained Christina's murder plot, and Dr. Wong's face went pale, and she said, "Susan, this is horrifying. I can't believe Christina would do this." And I said neither could I until I heard it with my own ears, and I need your help to fake my death. And Dr. Wong looked conflicted and said, "That's asking me to violate my medical ethics." And I said, "Patricia, my daughter is trying to kill me. If we don't do something dramatic right now, she'll succeed." And after a long silence, Dr. Wong nodded and said, "Okay, I'll help you, but we need to be extremely careful because if something goes wrong, you could actually die." The plan we developed was intricate and required perfect timing because Dr. Wong would give me a pharmaceutical-grade sedative called propofol mixed with a heart rate suppressant that would slow my vital signs to almost nothing, making me appear dead for approximately 4 to 5 hours, and she would monitor me the entire time to make sure I didn't slip into actual cardiac arrest, and she would write an official death certificate stating cardiac arrest secondary to acute kidney failure, which would match my recent medical history, and we would stage my death for a Friday evening, so that by the time I woke up on Saturday morning, Christina would have already started making funeral arrangements and showing her true colors, and Robert would capture everything on the hidden cameras he'd installed throughout my house, including in the living room, kitchen, and even the bedroom where Christina often made phone calls. On Friday, October 13th, which seemed appropriately ominous, I spent the morning preparing myself mentally and emotionally because what I was about to do was terrifying, and there was a real risk that something could go wrong and I could actually die, but I was more afraid of letting Christina get away with murder, and I was more angry than scared because this was my daughter, the baby I'd nursed and rocked to sleep and taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and cheered for at soccer games and hugged when she cried and celebrated when she succeeded, and she was repaying all that love by poisoning me. At exactly 6:30 that evening, I took the first dose of sedative that Dr. Wong had prepared, and I felt my body start to relax and my heart rate slow, and I called Christina from my bedroom and said in a weak, trembling voice that wasn't entirely acting, "Sweetheart, I don't feel well at all. I think something's really wrong. I can't breathe properly, and my chest hurts." And Christina came running upstairs and found me lying on the bed with my hand clutched to my chest, and my breathing was already becoming shallow from the sedative, and Christina checked my wrist for a pulse, and I watched through half-closed eyes as her face went through several expressions: concern, then calculation, then something that looked almost like excitement, and instead of immediately calling 911, she stood there for a moment just watching me, and I saw her glance at her watch, and then she pulled out her phone, but instead of dialing emergency services, she sent a text message, and I couldn't see what it said. But I imagined it was to Derek, telling him it was finally happening, and then after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, she finally called 911 and said in a panicked voice, "My mother isn't breathing. I think she's having a heart attack. Please send an ambulance right away." The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, and by that time the sedative had fully taken effect, and my heart rate was down to almost nothing, and my breathing was so shallow it was undetectable without specialized equipment. And I felt them lift me onto a stretcher, and I heard Christina crying and saying, "Please save her, she's all I have," and I wanted to scream liar, but I couldn't move or speak, and they loaded me into the ambulance, and Christina rode with me holding my hand and crying and saying, "Mom, please don't leave me, I love you so much," and her performance was so convincing that even the paramedics looked sympathetic, and one of them said to her, "Your mother is very lucky to have a daughter who loves her so much," and Christina sobbed and said, "She's my whole world." We arrived at Mercy General Hospital, and they rushed me into the emergency room, and Dr. Wong was already there waiting, because she'd arranged to be the attending physician on duty, and she examined me and checked my vitals, and after a few minutes she looked at Christina with a grave expression and said, "I'm so sorry, but your mother has passed away, her heart stopped, and we couldn't revive her," and Christina let out a scream that sounded genuinely anguished, and she collapsed into Derek's arms. Because apparently he'd met us at the hospital, and she sobbed uncontrollably and kept saying, "No, no, this can't be happening, she was fine this morning," and Dr. Wong said sometimes kidney failure can cause sudden cardiac arrest, especially in elderly patients, and there was nothing anyone could have done, and Christina nodded and wiped her tears and said, "Can I see her?" And Dr. Wong said, "Of course, let me give you a moment alone with her," and she led Christina into the room where I was lying on a gurney, covered with a white sheet, and Christina stood there looking at me, and as soon as Dr. Wong left the room, Christina's crying stopped instantly like someone had flipped a switch, and she pulled out her phone and called Derek and said, "It's done, she's gone," and I heard Derek say on speakerphone, "Are you sure?" and Christina replied, "Yes, the doctor pronounced her dead 20 minutes ago," and Derek said, "Okay, I'm calling the lawyer right now, we need to get that will executed as fast as possible," and Christina said, "Wait until after the funeral, we don't want to look too eager," and they both laughed, and Christina actually leaned down and whispered to my supposedly dead body, "Thanks, Mom, now I can finally live my life," and she patted my cold hand and walked out. Dr. Wong came back into the room and checked to make sure I was still stable, and she whispered, "Susan, can you hear me?" and I managed a tiny movement with my finger to indicate yes. And she said, "You're doing great, the sedative should wear off in about 3 more hours, and I'm going to move you to the morgue where you'll be safe," and she wheeled me down to the basement morgue, which was cold and dark and unsettling, and she positioned me in a private room where I would wake up, and she set up monitoring equipment to track my vital signs, and she said, "I'll be right outside if anything goes wrong," and then she left, and I was alone in the darkness with only the sound of my own shallow breathing. I woke up at 11:45 that night feeling groggy and disoriented and cold, and my mouth was dry and my head was pounding, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was, and then Dr. Wong appeared with a bottle of water and some crackers, and she said, "Susan, welcome back, you did it, you're officially dead," and I sat up slowly and asked what's happening at my house, and she pulled out her tablet and showed me the live feed from Robert's hidden cameras, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Because Christina and Derek were in my living room popping champagne and celebrating, and Christina was literally dancing around the room, saying, "We did it, we actually did it, $8 million, and that house in Malibu, and the restaurants and everything," and Derek was on his laptop looking at luxury yachts and saying, "I want to buy one of these immediately, maybe a 60-footer, and Christina laughed and said, "Yes, and I want to buy that penthouse in Manhattan I've had my eye on," and Derek said, "What about your mom's restaurants?" and Christina replied, "I'm selling all of them immediately, I never liked that Korean food business. Anyway, it's too much work, I'd rather just have liquid assets," and Derek said, "Smart thinking," and they toasted, and Christina said, "The best part is nobody suspects anything, everyone thinks she died of natural causes," and Derek said, "You were brilliant with that poison, it worked perfectly," and Christina smiled and said, "I know, right, I researched it for months to find something that would look like kidney failure." But the video got even worse, because then Christina called her Aunt Linda, my younger sister, who I'd supported financially for years after her husband left her, and Christina said on speakerphone, "Aunt Linda, Mom's finally gone," and Linda's voice came through saying, "Oh, thank God, Christina, I know that sounds terrible, but honestly she was getting so controlling with her money, and you deserve to inherit everything after putting up with her for so long," and Christina said, "I know, right, and the funeral is Sunday afternoon at Rosewood Memorial Chapel, can you come?" and Linda said, "Of course I'll be there, and I'll bring flowers," and Christina said, "Actually, don't waste money on flowers, she's dead, she doesn't care," and they both laughed, and I felt tears streaming down my face because my own sister was celebrating my death, and Dr. Wong put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Susan, I'm so sorry, I had no idea people could be so cruel," and I wiped my tears and said, I've known for a long time that people only pretended to love me because of my money, but I never thought my own daughter would try to kill me for it. Over the next 36 hours, I stayed hidden at Dr. Wong's private residence while Robert handled all the funeral arrangements, and he contacted the police and showed them all the evidence, the lab results proving the poisoning, the video footage of Christina celebrating my death and confessing to the murder plot, and her text messages to Derek discussing the timeline, and the police were absolutely stunned, and Detective Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in elder abuse cases, said, "Mrs. Kim, what you're planning is highly unusual and potentially dangerous, but given the overwhelming evidence of attempted murder, and the fact that you're technically the victim, I think we can work with you on this," and she agreed to station plainclothes officers throughout the funeral home to arrest Christina and Derek at the appropriate moment. And I said, "I have one specific request. I want to be in the coffin during the funeral. I want to hear what people say about me when they think I'm dead," and Detective Gonzalez looked at Dr. Wong with concern and said, "Is that medically safe for someone who was just sedated?" And Dr. Wong replied, "I'll be monitoring Susan's vital signs the entire time. We'll have a hidden oxygen supply in the coffin and an emergency medical team standing by, and I'll be sitting in the front row watching for any signs of distress. And if anything goes wrong, we'll abort immediately." And Detective Gonzalez nodded and said, "Okay, but the moment you sit up and reveal yourself, we're moving in to make the arrests because I don't want Christina or Derek to have any chance to run or hurt you." Sunday afternoon arrived, gray and overcast, which seemed fitting for a funeral, and I was in the preparation room at Rosewood Memorial Chapel, lying in the coffin, while the funeral director, Mr. Patterson, who was in on the entire plan, made final adjustments, and I was wearing my favorite jade green silk dress, the one I'd bought in Seoul 10 years ago, when I went back to visit my mother's grave, and I had my best pearl necklace and my jade bracelet, and my hair was styled beautifully, and my makeup was done perfectly because if I was going to attend my own funeral, I wanted to look good, and Mr. Patterson said, "Mrs. Kim, you look lovely and peaceful." And I replied, "Thank you, but I don't feel peaceful, I feel angry and hurt and betrayed," and he said, "That's understandable, but remember you're about to get justice," and I nodded, and he positioned the coffin in the main chapel with the lid open for viewing, but the lighting was deliberately dim and positioned so that it would be difficult for anyone to see fine details like whether my chest was rising and falling, and Dr. Wong had inserted a tiny oxygen tube through a hidden vent in the coffin base, so I could breathe comfortably, and I had a nearly invisible earpiece hidden under my hair, connected to a microphone Robert had placed in the flower arrangement beside my head, so I could hear everything that was said in the chapel. The funeral began at 2 p.m. exactly, and I heard people starting to arrive, and the sound of hushed voices and footsteps, and someone crying, and the funeral home organ playing soft melancholy music, and I could hear Christina greeting people at the entrance, and her voice was shaking with what sounded like genuine emotion, as she said, "Thank you so much for coming. My mother would have been so touched to see how many people cared about her," and I wanted to laugh because Christina didn't care who came. She just wanted to maintain her image as the devoted, grieving daughter. Mr. Patterson began the service by saying, "We are gathered here today to celebrate the life of Susan Kim, a remarkable woman who came to this country with nothing and built an empire through determination, hard work, and an unshakable belief in the American dream." And he went on to describe my journey from South Korea to Los Angeles, from dishwasher to restaurant owner, from struggling immigrant to successful businesswoman, and I heard people in the audience murmuring in agreement, and someone said she was truly inspiring. And then Mr. Patterson invited Christina to come up and give the eulogy, and I braced myself because I knew this was going to be painful. Christina walked to the podium, and I could hear her heels clicking on the marble floor, and she cleared her throat and began speaking in a voice that trembled with fake emotion, saying my mother was the strongest woman I ever knew, and I heard her voice crack convincingly, and she continued saying she came to this country with just $73 in her purse and a dream bigger than any ocean, and she worked 3 jobs to support us after my father left. And she never complained, she never gave up, she never stopped believing that tomorrow would be better than today. And I'm so grateful for everything she taught me about hard work and perseverance and dedication, and most importantly about family, because Mom always said that family was the most important thing in the world, and that everything she built was meant to be passed down to future generations to take care of the people she loved, And I promise, Mom, I promise you right now in front of all these witnesses that I will honor your legacy, and I will take care of everything you created, and I will make you proud." And people in the audience were crying, and someone said, "What a beautiful tribute, what a loving daughter." And I heard my sister Linda sob loudly and say, "Christina is so strong, she's handling this so well." Then other people came up to speak about me, and I heard Mrs. Park, who had worked at my first restaurant for 20 years, say, "Susan gave me my first job in America when no one else would hire me because my English was poor, and she treated me like family. She paid for my daughter's college tuition, and she never asked for anything in return, and I'm going to miss her every single day." And Mrs. Park started crying, and I felt tears streaming down my own face because I'd forgotten that I'd helped with her daughter's college. And I heard Mr. Lee from the Korean American Business Association say, "Susan was a pillar of our community. She donated thousands of dollars to help new immigrants start businesses, and she mentored young entrepreneurs, and she proved that hard work and integrity still matter in this world, and we've lost a giant today." And I heard various employees from my restaurants talking about how I'd given them bonuses when they had medical emergencies, and how I'd promoted from within, and how I'd created a family atmosphere where everyone felt valued. And each one of these testimonials reminded me that my life had meant something to people who weren't related to me by blood. After the formal eulogies, Mr. Patterson announced that the coffin would remain open for another hour for anyone who wanted to pay their final respects and say a private goodbye, and people started lining up, and I could hear them approaching one by one, and Mrs. Park leaned over the coffin and whispered, "Susan, thank you for everything you did for me and my family. You were an angel, and I'm sorry I never told you that while you were alive." And Mr. Lee said, "Susan, you inspired a generation of Korean Americans, and your legacy will live forever." And various employees came by crying and saying goodbye and thank you and I love you, and each one made my heart ache, because these were real, genuine expressions of love from people who had nothing to gain from my death. Then I heard Christina's voice approaching the coffin, and she was alone because Derek had stepped outside to take a phone call, and Christina stood beside the coffin, and I could feel her presence and smell her perfume, the expensive French perfume I'd bought her for her birthday last year. And she was silent for a moment, and then she leaned down close to my face, and she whispered so quietly that only I could hear, "Mom, I'm not going to pretend I'm sad you're gone. Because honestly, I've been waiting for this day for 5 years, ever since Dad died, and left everything to you instead of splitting it with me. And do you know why he left it all to you? Because he knew you'd give it to me eventually, but you held on to it like Scrooge, hoarding every penny like you were going to live forever, and I got tired of waiting. So I took matters into my own hands, and these past 6 weeks watching you get weaker and sicker, knowing that I was the one causing it, has been the most empowering experience of my life. Because for once I was in control, not you, and now finally I'm free." And she actually patted my folded hands and said, "Thanks for the 8 million, Mom, I promise I'll spend it well." And she straightened up and smoothed her black dress and turned to walk away with a satisfied smile on her face. That's when I opened my eyes and said, "You're welcome, Christina, but you're not getting a single penny." And I sat up in the coffin, and the scream that came out of Christina's mouth was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a pure primal shriek of absolute terror, and she stumbled backward and crashed into the flower arrangement and knocked over a huge vase of white roses, and people throughout the chapel started screaming and shouting, and someone yelled, "Oh my God, she's alive, it's a miracle." And Derek came running back inside and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me climbing out of the coffin with Dr. Wong rushing to help me, and I stood there in my jade green dress in front of 200 shocked witnesses and said, "Hello, everyone, I apologize for the dramatic presentation, but I needed all of you to witness what I'm about to say." And Christina was on the floor hyperventilating and gasping, and her face had gone completely white. And Derek tried to back toward the exit, but 2 men in suits moved to block the door, and I pointed at Christina and said, "This woman, my own daughter, has been systematically poisoning me for the past 6 weeks with antifreeze and arsenic purchased from an illegal online pharmacy in Mexico in a premeditated attempt to murder me and inherit my estate. And I have laboratory-proof medical documentation, video evidence of her confessing to the crime, and over 200 witnesses who just heard her admit to celebrating my death and plotting to liquidate my life's work." Detective Gonzalez and 5 other plainclothes officers immediately revealed themselves and moved in, and Detective Gonzalez, said Christina Williams and Derek Williams, "you are under arrest for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder fraud and elder abuse." And the officers moved to handcuff them, and Christina started screaming, "This isn't real, this can't be happening, she's supposed to be dead, she drank the tea, she was dying, I watched her die." And Derek was trying to argue, saying this is entrapment, you can't do this, and Detective Gonzalez said actually we can because attempted murder is a felony and you confessed on video. And she read them their Miranda rights while the entire chapel watched in stunned silence, except for some people who were filming everything on their phones. I walked slowly to the front of the chapel with Dr. Wong supporting my arm because I was still a bit unsteady, and I said I need everyone to please listen because I have more to say, and gradually the shocked murmuring died down, and I continued saying for 43 years I have worked every single day of my life to build something meaningful. I created businesses that employed over 300 people, I supported my community, I donated to scholarships and charities, I raised my daughter completely alone after her father abandoned us when she was 3 years old, and I did it all because I believed in hard work and integrity and family, and I thought I was building a legacy for Christina. But my daughter taught me a very painful lesson. She taught me that blood relation doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that some people view love as weakness and generosity as opportunity, and so I want to announce here in front of all of you that, as of yesterday morning, I have executed a new will and testament, and my previous will, which left everything to Christina, has been revoked, and my new will divides my entire estate worth $8.2 million to be distributed as follows: 30% to be divided equally among all my restaurant employees who have worked for me for more than 5 years as a thank you for their loyalty, 20% to the Korean American Business Association Scholarship Fund to help young immigrants pursue education, 20% to 3 charities that support immigrant women entrepreneurs, 15% to establish a foundation in my late husband David's name to provide business loans to minority-owned small businesses, and 15% to my church and various local charities, and Christina gets exactly nothing. Christina, who was handcuffed and being held by 2 officers, screamed, "No, you can't do that, it's my money, I'm your only child, you can't give away my inheritance." And I looked at her directly and said, "Actually, Christina, it was never your money, it was my money earned through my work and my sacrifices, and I can do whatever I want with it, and you're going to prison, so you won't need it anyway." And Derek started yelling, "You crazy bitch, this is insane," and one of the officers said, "That's enough," and they started dragging both of them toward the door, and Christina was sobbing now, saying, "Mom, please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any of it, please don't do this, I'll pay you back, I'll do anything, please." And I felt absolutely nothing as I watched her being led away because the daughter I'd loved had died a long time ago, probably around the time she decided my money was worth more than my life. After the police took Christina and Derek away, the chapel erupted in chaos with people talking and crying and hugging each other, and several people came up to me, and Mr. Lee said, "Susan, you are the bravest woman I have ever known," and Mrs. Park hugged me tightly and said, "We love you, we truly love you," and dozens of other people surrounded me expressing shock and support and gratitude and telling me they couldn't believe what Christina had done. And I realized that these people, my employees, my business associates, my community members, these were my real family, not the daughter who'd tried to kill me. The trial took place 4 months later, and it was a media sensation because the story of the woman who faked her death to catch her murderous daughter had spread across the country, and reporters from major news outlets came to cover it, and the prosecution had an overwhelming amount of evidence, including the laboratory reports proving the poisoning, the video footage of Christina celebrating my death and confessing to the murder plot, her text messages discussing the timeline and method, the testimony from Dr. Wong about my symptoms consistent with poisoning, the testimony from Robert Martinez about discovering the plot, and most damning of all, the recording of what Christina whispered at my coffin admitting to the attempted murder, and I testified for 3 hours describing everything from the night I overheard the initial conversation to the moment I sat up in the coffin, and the jury sat there with their mouths open in shock. Christina's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been under psychological stress and hadn't really meant to kill me, and that the poisoning was just a cry for help, and that I'd entrapped her by faking my death. But the prosecutor destroyed that argument by pointing out that you don't accidentally order industrial-grade poison from Mexico and systematically administer it for 6 weeks as a cry for help, and the jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on All counts attempted murder in the first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and elder abuse, and the judge sentenced Christina to 22 years in state prison, without possibility of parole for 18 years, and Derek received 25 years, because he had 2 prior fraud convictions and had actively participated in the conspiracy, and as they were being led away in handcuffs and orange jumpsuits, Christina looked at me one last time and said, "I hate you, I wish you had died," and I replied very calmly, "I know, Christina, and that's exactly why I'm still alive, because your hate made you predictable and sloppy, but my love for you almost killed me, so I guess we both learned something." Now I'm 67 years old, and it's been 18 months since I faked my death and attended my own funeral, and my life has completely changed because I reopened my flagship restaurant in Koreatown with a huge celebration and promoted my head chef Maria Rodriguez to general manager and partner, and I established the Susan Kim Foundation, which has already provided over $500,000 in business loans and mentorship to 73 immigrant women entrepreneurs, and I sold my house because it had too many painful memories and bought a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Santa Monica with an ocean view where I wake up every morning to the sound of waves, and I adopted 2 rescue dogs, a golden retriever named Hope and a German shepherd named Justice, and I started taking art classes at the community college where I'm learning to paint watercolors, and I joined a hiking group for women over 60, and I've traveled to Japan and Thailand and back to South Korea to visit my mother's grave and tell her everything that happened. People often ask me if I regret having Christina or if I wish I could go back and change things, and I always give them the same answer: I regret that she chose greed over love, and I regret that I didn't see the warning signs earlier, but I don't regret fighting back, and I don't regret surviving, and I don't regret learning who my real family is, because sometimes the people who love you most aren't connected to you by blood. They're the ones who show up with genuine tears when they think you're dead, and the ones who celebrate your life instead of your bank account, and I have dozens of those people now, my employees, who still call me to ask how I'm doing, my business association friends who invite me to dinners and events, my church community who prays for me and supports me, and even some of the people from that funeral who reached out afterward to tell me how much I'd inspired them. Last month, I received a letter from Christina sent from the Women's Correctional Facility where she's serving her sentence, and the letter said, "Mom, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want you to know that I'm sorry, not sorry that I got caught, but actually sorry for betraying you and hurting you and trying to take your life, because you gave me everything and I threw it away for money that wouldn't have even made me happy, and I understand if you never forgive me, but I needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and it wasn't the $8 million, it was you." And I read that letter 3 times and I cried, because a part of me, the mother part, wanted so badly to believe she meant it, but I remembered what she'd whispered at my coffin, and I remembered the smile on her face when she thought I was dying, and I realized that some betrayals are too deep to forgive, not because the person doesn't deserve forgiveness, but because accepting them back into your life would mean accepting that their love comes with conditions and price tags, and I deserve better than that. So I wrote back a short letter saying, "Christina, I acknowledge your apology, and I hope you find peace and rehabilitation during your sentence, but I will not be visiting you or maintaining contact because I need to protect myself and build a life surrounded by people who value me as a person, not as a source of income, and I wish you well. But our relationship as mother and daughter ended the day you decided my death was worth $8 million. Every morning now I wake up in my ocean view condo, and I make myself a cup of traditional Korean yuja tea, the kind my mother used to make for me when I was a little girl in Seoul, and I sit on my balcony with Hope and Justice lying at my feet, and I watch the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and gold, and I think about that scared 19-year-old girl who arrived at LAX with $73 in broken English and no idea what the future would hold, and I think about everything she survived, the poverty and discrimination and exhaustion and heartbreak and betrayal, and I'm so proud of her because she never gave up and she built something beautiful and meaningful and lasting, not just the restaurants and the money, but the lives she touched and the people she helped and the example she set, and that's a legacy that can never be stolen or poisoned or buried in a coffin. And some nights when I can't sleep, I go back and watch the video footage from my funeral, and I listen to all those people talking about what I meant to them and I cry grateful tears because I got to hear my own eulogy while I was still alive, and I learned that I mattered not because of my money, but because of my character and my kindness and my refusal to let the world break me, and that knowledge is worth more than $8 million ever could be. I'm Susan Kim, I'm 67 years old, and I faked my own death and attended my funeral in a coffin, and what I learned is that death is the ultimate truth serum. It shows you exactly who people are when they think you're not watching, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is that truth, even if it comes from lying in a coffin pretending to be dead, and my daughter is in prison serving 22 years and my money is going to people who will use it to build and create and help instead of to destroy, and I'm finally truly free for the first time in my life because I'm no longer carrying the weight of other people's expectations or trying to buy love that should be freely given, and every breath I take now is a breath Christina tried to steal from me, and that makes it even more precious, and every sunrise I see is one she wanted to prevent, and that makes it even more beautiful, and I survived not just the poisoning but the betrayal and the heartbreak and the loneliness, and I built something new and better from the ashes of that pain, and that's the real miracle, not that I faked my death and sat up in a coffin, but that I found the strength to let go of the daughter I thought I had and embraced the life and the family I actually deserve. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.